Welcome everyone to today's lecture. Thank you for coming. My name is Mike Pitstick. I'm Associate Director of Annual Giving here at UD, and I'm happy to be with you today. EnCore is a lecture series conducted by faculty of the University of Dallas in conjunction with the Office of Alumni Relations. The lectures are offered to alumni and friends and reframe topics from the core curriculum in fresh perspectives. Today's lecture is co-hosted by Liberal Learning for Life's Studies in Catholic Faith and Culture program, which facilitates intellectual formation in the Catholic liberal arts tradition by offering video-based courses co-taught by UD professors. Videos like the one we will watch together today are currently available for free. See the chat for links and more information, and I think we have an image of all of the courses that we will share as well. Today we'll be watching the first session from the 20-session video-based course called The Person, History, and Tradition. Since the course is co-taught by dozens of UD professors, today you'll first see Dr. Gregory Roper, who will introduce the course and Dr. Moran's presentation, followed by Dr. Moran speaking on Virgil's Aeneid, History, and Tradition. I hope you enjoy it. There's a handout for this lecture as well, which you can also find in the chat. After the video, Dr. Michael West, Affiliate Assistant Professor of English, Outreach Director in the Liberal Learning for Life program, and UD alumnus, will discuss the video with Dr. Andrew Moran. I'd like to thank Dr. Moran, also a UD alumnus, for joining us today. In case you haven't heard, he and Dr. Roper have edited a new book on the UD Rome campus, which is pictured behind me, in celebration of its 50th anniversary. The book is titled Due Santi and the University of Dallas, Un Piccolo Paradiso, and is available for pre-order now at deweysantibook.com. And that link will be in the chat as well. For each copy sold, alumni Danny and Kathy Milligan will donate $10 to the Charles T. Ewell Memorial Scholarship. So it's a great opportunity to support the university and our faculty. When Drs. West and Moran open up the discussion to all of you after the video, please use the raise hand function or a comment in the chat to indicate that you'd like to speak. You can also submit questions or comments in the chat box throughout the lecture. Please remain muted unless I call on you to speak, but you are invited to turn on your video at any time. If you have any technical problems or questions during the video or discussion, please message Alyssa Coe for assistance. And after all of that, without further ado, we can go ahead and get started with the video.
Welcome to Course 2 in the Studies in Catholic Faith and Culture program. My name is Greg Roper. I've been the chair of the English department here at the University of Dallas for the last 9 years. In Course 1, we studied the human person, life, and community. And I could sum that up by saying that the human person is not an isolated individual, but relational, that we live in community, and we find our greatest humanity with one another. No one is ever born an isolated individual. From the minute of our conception, we are someone's son or daughter or granddaughter or grandson and even cousin. We all are born into a tissue of relations. We're all born, that is, into a community. And the human infant cannot take care of him or herself. It needs parents to feed them and change them and teach them and lead them up into life. The essence of the human person in the sense of life and community is that notion of relation. And that's what we studied in Course 1. The second course is called The Human Person, History, and Tradition. What we want to think about now is how do we extend that community through time? All of us is born in a certain time and a certain place, and we live our life in a very short span. You might think of like a line segment. I was born in Jackson, Mississippi in 1962, and I will die, if I live about as long as my parents, in about the year 2055. That can seem like a very brief period of time, and to many people could seem a matter of just fate or chance. I'm dropped into this time. I had no choice which year, which place I would be born, and I was dropped into this time and I'll be done. And yet, for the Catholic, we are born into time, but move to all of eternity. Think of those medieval pilgrims on the path to their pilgrimages. They would leave their homes in England and travel to Canterbury, or they would travel to Rome, or the greatest pilgrimage of all, to the Holy Land in Jerusalem. And yet that was always a metaphor for homo viator, man on the way, man on the journey. And the journey to where? To eternity, to live with God in the celestial Jerusalem. That's one pole of what this course is about. The other is about tradition. Because if we live in just this little slice of time, and we're not just a line segment, but a ray pointing to all of eternity, then we have to begin thinking about the fact that we weren't self-created. Of course, our parents and God gave us life, but even our values, our attitudes were given to us, were handed over to us. The Latin phrase tradare means to hand across. And so our values, our attitudes, which sports teams we root for, the foods that we like, the way we dress is handed to us from tradition. When I'm talking to my students in my medieval classes, I like to tell them to imagine that they are early medieval men and women just after the wreckage of Rome and the fall of the Roman Empire. And I say, you have to decide what are you going to keep with you from ancient Rome, from the classical world, and bring into this new world. Imagine that a war swept across America, and all you had time to do was to back up a U-Haul and throw a bunch of things in there. And I challenged them, what would you put in the U-Haul? Would it be books? Would it be artifacts, photo albums? What are the things that you would bring with you from this culture to take with you into that indeterminate future? What would nourish your children, your grandchildren? That's what this course is about. The human person, history, and tradition. What it is to live in time and be pointed towards eternity, and yet what it is also to have things handed to us from the past and the whole content of that past, and yet what is it that we value enough that we think is so important to hand on to the future. So join us. That's what we will explore for the next 10 classes in the human person, history, and tradition. Often in America today, we think of history in two negative ways. Either as the boring dates and names that we had to memorize in our school days, or as, oh, just all that stuff from the past that has nothing to do with us. We point towards the future. We are a forward-looking people. And we think of tradition in small ways. This is, oh, the pies that Grandma bakes every Christmas or something like that. But I want to challenge you to think of history and tradition in richer, more thoughtful ways. Think of Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof. Tradition, tradition, and how tradition forms everything in his small Jewish community in Russia, and how it gives shape and meaning to their entire lives. Well, today we're going to explore one poet in ancient Rome who did that within his own community and helped write a great epic poem, the Aeneid, that gave shape to all of Rome. His name is Virgil, and his great poem, the Aeneid, follows Aeneas as he leaves the burning city of Troy, travels throughout the Mediterranean for 10 years before landing and founding the new city of Rome. Now, it's a fascinating thing because this is a poem that's made out of both history and tradition. We know that historically, some city like Troy did exist on the shores of Turkey, and it did suffer some sort of burning cataclysm around the time of the year 1250 BC. And we know, of course, Rome exists today as a historical city, and it had a historical founding. So it's a story made that's bookended by history, but everything in the middle is formed out of tradition. Virgil took stories, legends about Aeneas, about the founding of Rome that had been known for hundreds and hundreds of years. But he also did something else. He took the two great epics of the Greek world, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and melded the two of them together in a poetic tradition. And in doing so, gave to the Romans a sense of their own history, a sense of their own tradition, a sense of their own duty as leaders of the great empire in the Mediterranean world. So the past informed the present. The legends and traditions gave shape to who Romans were that day. For Virgil, he packed up a very, very complex U-Haul truck and took all of those things from the past and drove it into the future and offered that to Rome as his gift to them.
Why read the Aeneid? Well, the short answer is it's just great. The long answer, and the answer that's pertinent to this program, right, one entitled The Person, History and Tradition, is that this is the poem that's just so focused on history and tradition. This is a poem that can lead us to think better about history and tradition. There's a memorable phrase from the Aeneid, rerum lacrimae, the tears of things. This phrase is used earlier in the poem when Aeneas is looking at a painting of the Trojan War, the war that he had just fought in which his comrades had died, and which ends with his city, Troy, burned to the ground. The tears of things. The most beautiful things are lost, and Virgil captures the intensity of our love for beautiful things and the pain we feel when they are lost. The Aeneid is a poem about living with loss. And here, the Roman poem is different than the Greek poems. In Homer's tragic epic, the Iliad, the great hero Achilles will die young, and that is his tragedy. And yet, he will not grow old. He will not suffer the loss of physical vigor. He will not suffer the myriad of losses that make up a human life. In the Odyssey, the comic epic, Odysseus has to struggle to return home, but then everything is restored to him. His family, his friends, his kingdom, his wealth, his health. We hear unto a sleek old age. But what Aeneas loves most will not be restored to him. Troy has burned to the ground, lost forever. The Roman epic begins with loss. The poem begins with the refugees from Troy, the ones who have survived, taking to their ships and heading to onto the Mediterranean, looking for a new home. But almost immediately they encounter a deadly storm. And so we read about the ships going down, and we read too about shields, planks, precious things of Troy being lost in the water. The precious things are lost. But not all the precious things. From the burning city of Troy, Aeneas is able to save the Penates, that is, these figurines which represent the household gods, the most sacred objects for the Trojans. And Aeneas now will carry them with him, ultimately to his new home, Rome. In Aeneas's sad acceptance that some precious things are lost, and yet his commitment to the preservation of the most important things, the most sacred things, Aeneas provides an image for how to live within the flux of time. The hero's mission is to create something new for Aeneas, the new city of Rome. And yet, this new thing is not to be cut off completely from the past. That what is most essential from the past will be the hero's mission to bring forward and to pass on. In fact, I think we could call Aeneas a traditionalist, quite literally. The word tradition comes from a Latin word, a Latin verb, traducere, meaning to deliver over, to pass on. Aeneas's role is to pass on what has been given to him, those sacred objects. And there's one image from the poem that captures this absolutely perfectly. When in Rome, one must go to the Galleria Borghese and see one of the most brilliant statues in the history of the world by Gian Lorenzo Bernini, a statue of Aeneas with his father Anchises and his son Ascanius, as Aeneas is saving those very Penates, those household gods. As the city of Troy is burning, Aeneas and his father Anchises are despairing. But they then see a tongue of flame come down and dance harmlessly on the head of Aeneas's young son Ascanius. And they take this as a sign that the gods will preserve them. When we read from the Aeneid, Aeneas's response then, as after he sees that tongue of flame, Then come, dear father, arms around my neck. I'll take you on my shoulders, no great weight. Whatever happens, both will face one danger, find one safety. Ascanius will come with me. Father, carry our hearth gods, our Penates. And so Anchises, the old man, carried by his son Aeneas, is carrying the figurines, the hearth gods, which he will eventually pass on, hand over to his son Aeneas, who then will hand them on to his son Ascanius, who then will hand them on to his descendants, the Roman people. The Aeneid is so concerned with the past because it's so concerned with the future. And this especially comes out when one compares the Aeneid, Virgil's Roman epic, with Homer's Greek epics. Virgil is constantly imitating Homer, taking scenes from Homer, and then reworking them to make his own poem. If you want to be good at anything, right, you imitate the best of what's been done before and then make it your own. Okay, so in the Odyssey, Homer has a scene in which his hero Odysseus goes down into the underworld and he meets the shade of his mother and he hears a prophecy. And then he sees the shades of the dead. So Virgil, in the Aeneid, has his hero Aeneas go down into the underworld. And he'll see Anchises after Anchises' death. And he'll hear a prophecy, just as in Homer's poem. And he'll then see the shades of the souls waiting to be born, the future Romans. Let me read again from the Aeneid, the scene in which Anchises in the underworld greets his son Aeneas and points out to him the souls of their descendants waiting to be born. Come, Anchises said, what glories follow Dardan generations and after years, and from Italian blood, what famous children in your line will come, souls of the future living in our name. I shall tell clearly now, and in the telling, teach you your destiny. And then Anchises then will be specific about what exactly that destiny entails. It entails their descendants creating the great Roman Empire, which will have a particular mission for the history of the world. Anchises says to Aeneas, Roman, remember by your strength to rule earth's peoples, for your arts are to be these, to pacify, to impose the rule of law, to spare the conquered, battle down the proud. It's almost as if Anchises has to first give Aeneas the timeline. Right? Here are the souls waiting to be born. Right? There is Romulus, who will found the city itself, put up its first walls. There is Brutus, who will found the Republic of Rome. And then there is Julius Caesar, and there is Augustus, who will be the first emperor. It's as if he needs that timeline so that he can then understand that particular mission, this mission to bring peace and law to the world. Likewise, the Roman poet Virgil reworks another scene from Homer, this time from the Iliad, to indicate that Aeneas must bear the burden of history. In the Iliad, the tragic hero Achilles is given a shield, forged for him by the smith god, Hephaestus, the lame god. And when Achilles sees it, he is angry. And yet it is just this most amazing shield. On it are everything. The sun and the moon and the stars, the earth and the rivers surrounding the world. And he shows two cities, a city at peace and a city at war. Scenes of plowing, of country folk having festive dances, a herdsman protecting their beasts from wild animals. Everything on it. On Achilles' shield is everything. On Achilles' shield are the eternal things. There will always be the sun and the moon and the stars. There will always be a city at peace. There will always be a city at war. There will always be herding and plowing and dancing. And in all this, Homer is being very Greek. Achilles is to meditate on the nature of things. Achilles, who when one first reads this poem, one sees him as this brutal, fearsome warrior, is really a philosophic quester. And Achilles is trying to understand the nature of the universe, and in particular, how it is that a man such as he, the son of a goddess, and yet the son too of a man, and thus is mortal, how it is that somebody with his excellence must die. The timelessness of all this, these eternal things, only serves to point to the time-bound quality of Achilles' existence, of our existence, the brevity of our lives, that we must die. Aeneas too has a shield made by the smith god, now called by his Roman name Vulcan. But he responds very differently to his shield. Whereas Achilles was angry to see the nature of the cosmos, Aeneas responds with joy and wonder when he sees the unfolding of the future, of the Rome that he is in a way carrying, as is imaged in his carrying that shield. The elaborate details on Aeneas' shield are another timeline, another history book. Again, we have Romulus, the one who actually built the walls of Rome, and we hear the story of him being nursed by the she-wolf, right? And that's an image of the violence of early Rome. We hear that on the shield there are images of chaste ladies carrying sacred images. And we hear about the just Senator Cato delivering laws. And so this noble ideal of Rome as the city of piety, as the city of law and order, is present there in the shield. At the very center of the shield is one last battle, the Battle of Actium. And so it's as if the whole of history is leading up to the Battle of Actium, there at the very center of the shield. And so in the shield, there's an image of the two great Roman generals now in this final battle. Augustus, who rules the western half of the empire, centered in Italy, and then his enemy, Mark Antony, ruling the east with his lover, the Egyptian queen Cleopatra. And Augustus from Italy wins. Augustus, who heard Virgil recite this poem to him. Augustus, who the shield depicts as then celebrating the victory by piously offering sacrifices to the Italian gods. Whereas Mark Antony and Cleopatra had worshipped these foreign monstrous gods, such as the barking dog god Anubis. Aeneas on his shield carries history, a history that goes beyond barbarism to piety, to law, and ultimately to Augustus establishing the empire. But let me end with a twist. Nothing is ever so simple. Aeneas has suffered loss after loss for this great mission. But that mission then entails that all these peoples of the empire, people from what are now northern France, Belgium, all the way to Africa, to Arabia, are to be beaten down, that these are barbarians to be conquered. And so the poem is now leaving us with this puzzle. Is empire really ultimately about peace for all these peoples living together, and all of them to be following just laws? Or is the poem ultimately revealing that empire is an example of what St. Augustine would later call the lust for domination, and that the others have to be beaten down so that we can control them? Moreover, there's this other complexity involving the hero himself, Aeneas. He is the pious hero, the one who is always sacrificing himself on behalf of the higher mission. And yet, to accomplish that mission, he has to fight battles in which his violence, his rage overwhelms him. He becomes irrational on the battlefield, vicious. And so that the enemy of tyrants seems as if he is in danger of becoming a tyrant himself. There's some people who claim that Virgil's Aeneid is propaganda for the Emperor Augustus, and that's just not right. Propaganda is simplistic. It doesn't capture the complexities, such as the Aeneid captures the complexities. And propaganda doesn't make us feel honestly rerum lacrimae, the tears of things. No, instead, what the Aeneid ultimately does is make us feel the tears of things and acknowledge the complexities of things, so that it asks of us that we have a mind for complexity and a willingness to make balanced judgments, and a willingness to think about our situation in history and our own mission.
So Virgil brought the past into the Roman present. Virgil was able to give the Romans a sense of their history, a sense of their tradition, so that they could take those values and those attitudes, that heroic pietas from Aeneas, and form the Rome of the present and their future. But not in a simple rah-rah Rome propagandistic way. As Dr. Moran says, great poems offer complex views of life. Think of the way that Dr. Moran says that Aeneas brought with him the lacrimae rerum, the tears of things, the losses from Troy. He left a burning city. He left behind the sadness of the loss of everything that he knew. But he brought forth those lacrimae rerum, the tears of things, into a present to enrich the present. So as you turn into your discussion today, I'd like you to begin thinking about some of those things. What are the penates? What are the household gods that have been brought from the past into your family and that you would like to pass on to your children, your grandchildren, and those after? How do we form a community out of taking from the past and handing on to the future?
I will now be turning it over to Dr. West and Dr. Moran. As I mentioned before, especially given our relatively large group, once the discussion is opened up to everyone else, please use the raise hand function, which, depending on your settings, may be found at the bottom of the participants list, or a comment in the chat to indicate that you'd like to speak. If you have any problems, do please let us know in the chat, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. West and Dr. Moran.
Great, thank you, Mike. I want to confirm, if you're able to hear me, can you put your thumb up? Excellent, thank you. I want to invite those of us who are here, if you wish and are able, to turn on your video so that we can see your face when you speak. Also, it just creates more of a sense of a room. I'm going to first put something in the chat box. I'm going to post a link to a short handout. This is what we would use if you were taking the full course. It contains a summary of Dr. Moran's presentation and also includes some discussion questions at the end. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to first post and read about 5 discussion questions, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Moran a few questions, and then about 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to open it up to the entire group, and I invite you all to respond either to something Dr. Moran said in his presentation, in his video, or something that he says now that seems wise to you, or if you want to speak about this and respond to one of the 5 questions or another one that comes to mind, you're welcome to do that. So first, you can see in the chat box, I've just put 5 questions. I'm going to read them aloud now. So we'll have a chance to meditate on them for a few minutes before we decide which ones we want to take up together. So number 1, what is heroic about Aeneas in terms of history and culture? Number 2, how is Aeneas both a traditionalist and yet a creator of something new? What is the relationship between being a traditionalist and the desire to improve the present or affect the future? Number 3, what are the penates, the sacred things that have been preserved and handed over to you? Who is the Aeneas of your family, your community, your parish, your business? Why are these things sacred, and why are they worthy of being handed over and passed on? Number 4, why is it important to feel deeply the lacrimae rerum, the tears of things? Why is acknowledging loss important to present the present health and future optimism? And finally, number 5, what can a Catholic learn from this pagan culture? What can be brought from the pagan Aeneid into the Christian world? Dr. Moran, I'm now going to address you, and we'll talk for a few minutes here. First, I just want to say how this is an absolute virtuoso lecture. First of all, on the Aeneid as a text that is a sharply and wisely written work of literature, and at the same time is, through that literary form, a work of almost wisdom literature, and also one that acknowledges our lives as social beings and as political beings, and the things that are most important to us. And I think that you brought out so well, and there's so many sort of wonderful lines I feel like I can meditate on. One of them you say is, Aeneas provides an image of how to live in the flux of time, in which the most precious things are lost. And I think that's something that I am, when you said that, it knocked me flat, and I wrote it down in the presentation. And I'm sure that others have their own versions of those lines as well. But Dr. Moran, I want to start with another one of those great lines that you gave. You said that the Aeneid is so concerned with the past because it is so concerned with the future. And I think that we might contrast this point that you make with what supposedly the great industrialist Henry Ford says about history. He famously said, he's quoted to have said, history is bunk. Yes. The idea being that if you want to progress into the future, there's a way in which history is either holding us back or is this drag upon us in some way. And what you say, in the world, we live in Henry Ford's world in a certain sense, in which what you say sounds counterintuitive, to say that that one should be concerned with the past because one is concerned with the future. I just want to know, can you say a little more about that? How would you elaborate this point, either in terms of the Aeneid or just in the broader sense of maybe what we do here at UD?
Sure. A lot of my thinking here about the Aeneid was the Catholic Faith and Culture Project, the one on the Hungarian-American historian John Lukács. If any of you have never read, Lukács is not that well known. He died at the age of 95 last year. He's one of the great thinkers of the last half century, and I wish more people knew him. One of the things that Lukács argues is, I know that Henry Ford quotation because I'd read it in one of Lukács's books. And Lukács contrasts that kind of utilitarian history is bunk attitude of a Henry Ford with, at the same time, the modern West has developed a historical consciousness such as has never really existed in the history of the world before. And Lukács thinks that this is actually one of the great glories of the modern world. And that even defines the modern West as much as the scientific revolution, that we have a sense of ourselves as within time that earlier peoples didn't have. We're and that history is thus a kind of way of, not just facts and dates, but it's even a way of understanding. And Lukács sees this as, to a great degree, as coming out of the historical nature of Christianity, right? That the truth claims of Christianity are historical truth claims, as opposed to, let's say, most Asian religions, right? The claim that Jesus was born here, he died here, right? At this time, in this place, all that. And yet, one of the things that then struck me, though, is that the Aeneid is historically, this pagan text, is historically minded in a way that the pagan texts, the Iliad, the Odyssey, are not really historically minded. And that might even help us see something else about the modern West, that the Christian East did not quite develop the sense of history that we have and seeing things historically, right? And so that great inheritance of a rich historical understanding, yes, it's Christian, but actually in the West, the Roman parts of the Latin-speaking parts of the empire, Western Europe, it really is part of the inheritance of the Roman world itself. And there are problems with it. And I love teaching at the University of Dallas, and one of the reasons is that we don't have the stupidity of the tedious new historicist mindset that dominates academia everywhere else, right? Where history is reduced to this kind of pagan deity that we have to bow down to, right? Denying us our own freedom. Right? No. And that's actually a way that a modern Western historical consciousness can be perverted. And yet I think that this inheritance from both the Christian understanding of the incarnation, but also from the Latin West, is one of the kind of the great things that we have to offer.
Thank you. My other question is, I just want to know if you could clarify what seemed a very wise and complex point you were making at the end. And it's right after you say, but there's a twist. And my understanding of the twist is, it seems like, here's a question. Is the point about the twist that Virgil is doing two things? Is it true to say that Virgil is doing two things in the Aeneid? He is glorifying the Roman political order and the power of the reigning Emperor Augustus. And that in doing so, that entails or seems to also mean that he shows the costs of that order, or he shows that that order is built upon the pain of the conquered, the at times vicious violence of the conquerors that Aeneas seems to show, in particular at the end, and also the reality of loss, that anything that is built on a sort of a foundation of ruins, so to speak, that just as Rome is born or needs Troy to burn for Rome to rise, there's a way in which these other kingdoms that the Romans call barbarians also need to burn or need to be crushed in a certain sense for Rome to rise. Is that a fair summary of the point you're trying to make, or how would you elaborate or correct my characterization of it?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. Let me just add a few things. That there's a debate about how to understand the ending of the Aeneid, right? So you have these two radically different understandings of the poem. The traditional one, the Aeneid glorifies Rome. It's simple as that. Yay, yay, Rome, right? But then you think about the brutality of the way in which Aeneas kills Turnus, and how Aeneas, in trying to uphold part of the mission that Anchises has given him, right, to impose the rule of law, right, but he cannot spare the conquered, right? The man's prone on the ground and he kills him, and so that you're left with these antithetical things and what to make of them. And afraid I'm losing my point here. Let me go back to something that Dr. Teresa Kenny once said about the ending, which I found really striking. So as opposed to the one ending, yay, yay, Rome, the other, no, it's the other reading, no, it's about how actually Rome is an evil empire and it's all about the tyranny that follows from the pursuit of empire. She stressed the sadness of it, and in particular how the first nation to be lost is Italy. Right, that Aeneas goes down and his men are hacking down shrines to Italian gods, right, as they bring their Olympians with them. And I would then add to it, though, and yet it has to be, that there is this terrible sense I find in the Aeneid of a necessity that it's a world of chaos. Virgil's a man who lived through chaos. And it's not so, superficially the poem glorifies empire. It seems to be more that the poem does ultimately support empire, but simply out of necessity. And so all the sad things that come along with empire and all the things that get lost from empire, Virgil will ultimately be truly honest about, well, I think still upholding the need for empire as the only way to overcome the barbarism that's always encroaching. If that makes sense.
I think that's wonderful. It has real resonances with, I think, our own moment in the U.S., in which we are thinking about our own history and tradition in a lot of different ways. There's one version of a story about the United States that I feel like has gained real prominence in the last few years, you might say, which is something like, the United States is built on fundamental injustice. And active theft. And part of it involves the theft of land and the enslavement of human beings. And I want to know, there's a way in which Virgil is an interesting case study, because Virgil doesn't hide the ways in which what Rome is built on. But I guess let's be UD for a moment. From Virgil's point of view, or from the point of view of Virgilian wisdom, what would you think of that story that we hear about the United States? What is right about that, and what is maybe missing or incomplete about thinking about our history in that way? Now, that's a big question, Dr. Moran. You are an English professor. You are not a pundit or a political theorist, but you've clearly thought about this quite a bit. I'm just interested in your reaction, and then I want to open the conversation up to everyone. But go ahead, Dr. Moran.
Maybe I'll be indirect here and not take that on directly, because I don't know what Virgil would say about but as I said, that Virgil is this poet giving us the complexities, right? And so the noble mission, right? The end, right? We need to be good Aristotelians and remember, like, final cause, right? That purpose, right? To bring about law and order. And yet Virgil is also the one who shows, the means by which law and order are brought about in often tragic ways. One thing that might be worth thinking about with the Aeneid in light of our own situation is, again, an ambiguity. How it's very much a poem about, well, it's a poem about war, right? But it's a poem about war within, right? Most literally, the hero himself, Aeneid, but then the peoples of Italy, right? Whereas the Iliad gives us a war between nations, right? The Trojans and the Achaeans. One can very much see the war in the Aeneid as a civil war, right? All these different tribes of Italy, right? And the Trojans have now become another of those tribes, all lining up with each other. The Trojans with the Arcadians and somebody else against the Rutulians and the Latins and etc., and the Volscians. And the tragedy of it is the tragedy of civil war, right? Which Virgil himself lived with. The poem ends, well, I should say the penultimate scene of the poem is Jupiter on a cloud, right? Rational Jupiter, who has the high end, final end of law and order, right? And he's been, we have this nice Stoic thing of restraining the violent passions and the lower things, right? And his angry, passionate wife, Juno, comes up in the cloud with him, and she knows she's been defeated, right? That her beloved Rutulians and Latins are going to lose to those hated Trojans. But they work out a settlement in that penultimate of unity, right? And that all the tribes are to come together as one. Right? And Jupiter acknowledges that the customs of the people will be not Trojan, but Italian, right? Dr. Sweet is not teaching Trojan here at the University of Dallas, right? They're going to speak Latin, right? And so that there is this new oneness that is ultimately to come about. Anyhow, so that might be something that's really worth thinking about with the Aeneid.
Thank you, Dr. Moran.